Trump's $2,000 stimuluses to all Americans from tariffs. Before we get started, before we start this conversation, before I even come in and start talking the content, I want you to come in, double tap the screen, push the like button, have a seat, bring your notebook and pen. You're gonna need a notebook and pen to take notes. Because this right here is gonna blow your mind. And you need to write this information down to go along with the other information that you're gonna learn by watching me over time. Push that like button. Everybody that watch me have a notebook. They take notes. And I ask you to grab you a notebook. Go buy you a notebook. Put it, the Mr. Snagger Push Show information notebook to write it down. Everybody that watch me need a notebook and a pen to be able to write down. And it's subliminals, little bitty blessings in between. And you write them down and you will get the full blessing. The full blessing. All right, man. Yeah. Not only that, one of my good clients just pulled up. Yeah, one of my exotic clients. Yeah, I gotta go back to work. It's that time. See, I was y'all a good show right now and talk about some things. Matter of fact, we're just gonna stay right here. And we're gonna let y'all come on in, push that like button, be my friend. Smoke me a cigarette real quick. I think it's a great idea. A lot of Americans finna get some money. A lot of Americans is fixing to get some money, starting with $2,000 checks. I want y'all to watch this article and tell me what y'all think.
In potentially at least one of the worst payouts in U.S. history, on Sunday, November 9th, President Trump announced this plan to take the huge amount of money that's been collected from tariffs and use that money to send $2,000 checks to most American households. Meaning that as long as you are not a super high income earner, you stand to get a piece of the nearly $200 billion collected in tariffs. But there's more to it, both in terms of who might qualify, as well as what the U.S. Supreme Court, as well as the U.S. Congress, will actually allow this plan to happen. And so, let me briefly give you the history of the situation, as well as the different factors that'll determine whether you will get a $2,000 check or not. Now, to start with, on April 2nd of this year, President Trump declared Liberation Day. In a speech, he announced that the U.S. was basically being liberated from unfair trade agreements with countries around the whole world. Take a listen.
This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
Also, on that very same day, President Trump signed into effect the very consequential Executive Order 14257. That order, it declared a national emergency over the U.S.'s trade deficit, and it invoked authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose sweeping tariffs on most foreign imports. And so immediately, almost every country was hit with a 10% tariff, baseline tariff, followed up by country-specific tariffs, which went all the way up to 50%. Now, since then, most countries have agreed to come to the table and work out a bilateral trade deal, but because of the baseline tariffs, the amount of money that the U.S. Treasury has been taking in this year is truly astounding. According to the Treasury Department, $195 billion in customs duties have been collected in the first 3 quarters of 2025. The Treasury Department also projected that tariff revenue could reach around $300 billion by the end of the calendar year. $300 billion. For your reference, that's nearly a 400% increase compared to what it was last year in 2024. And so obviously that's a lot of money. And one of the promises that Trump made early on was to potentially give that money back to the American taxpayers. And indeed, just earlier this month, President Trump floated the idea of sending $2,000 checks to both lower as well as middle class Americans.
And one of the things we're going to do, we're going to issue a dividend to our middle income people and lower income people of about $2,000. And we're going to use the remaining tariffs to lower our debt. We're going to be lowering our debt, which is a national security.
Now, that statement of his in the Oval Office, it came in conjunction with a post on Truth Social, wherein President Trump wrote the following, quote, "We are taking in trillions of dollars and will soon begin paying down our enormous debt, which is $37 trillion. Record investment in the USA, plants and factories going up all over the place, a dividend of at least $2,000 a person, not including high-income people, will be paid to everyone." Now, the trillions that he mentioned in the statement are, of course, not just tariffs alone. It includes investment promises coming in from other nations as well as foreign companies. But the point is the same. The promise of a $2,000 dividend check being given to lower and middle income Americans. However, before you begin to earmark that money for your own household, there are a few caveats that you should know about. The first is the legal/political angle. You see, President Trump's announcement of these $2,000 dividend checks, it came just days after the U.S. Supreme Court listened to oral arguments in a case that was looking to scrap these tariffs altogether. Quote, "The president's announcement on November 9th came just days after the Supreme Court heard arguments over the legality of his global tariff agenda imposed earlier this year. Justices probed Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which allows presidents to regulate imports in response to emergencies. Congress, through Article 1 of the Constitution, has the authority to impose tariffs. Some justices seem skeptical
Push that like button.
of that law to impose tariffs, while others were more to read.
Would you like to get $2,000
and what it will
from the
mean
U.S.
for the
government?
president's tariff agenda. And the Supreme Court's ruling on this particular issue, it will have direct implications on the possibility of these $2,000 dividend checks going out, because if they reverse the tariffs, a lot of that money will actually have to be sent back to the other countries. Quote, "The ruling will also likely affect whether the administration can issue tariff revenue rebate checks in the first place, as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent indicated in early September that some of the revenue may need to be returned if the Supreme Court upholds a lower court order that blocked a large portion of the president's tariffs." Now, in terms of how much money specifically will have to be sent back if the Supreme Court rules against it, the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Scott Bessent, he said the following, quote, "We would have to give a refund on about half the tariffs, which would be terrible for the Treasury. If the court says it, we'd have to do it." Now, setting aside the legal question of whether Trump was legally allowed to do this or not, if that were to happen, if we have to send half the money back, that would be the absolute worst case scenario for the American consumer. That's because if you just think about how this whole thing played out, the U.S. imposed tariffs on the goods coming into our country from other nations. Those foreign companies, they raised the prices of their goods to compensate for these tariffs, and so naturally the American consumers had to pay more for the goods on the shelf. But the U.S. Treasury was able to collect more tariff revenue, and therefore they planned to issue a dividend check back to the American consumers. And so in theory that worked out well. But if the Supreme Court rules that the tariffs were illegal in the first place, they would just force the U.S. government to send that tariff money back to those foreign companies. Meaning, if that were to happen, the foreign companies were charged the tariff. They pass that tariff on in the form of an added cost to the American consumer, but then after all is said and done, those foreign companies will get a rebate for the tariff they paid. And so the only difference that'll happen over the last year is that the American consumer had to pay more for the same goods, while those other companies got to pad their profit margin. So obviously that's the worst scenario, which is probably exactly why President Trump is now urgently making his appeal directly to the American people through his social media posts. In fact, just 4 minutes after posting his proposal about the $2,000 checks going out to the American people, President Trump followed up by saying the following, quote, "Without tariffs, we have none of the following just posted true." And then, obviously, he didn't think that was enough, because an hour later he wrote another post criticizing the viewpoint which says that he does not have the authority as U.S. president to impose blanket tariffs on all U.S. trading partners. Quote, "So let's get this straight. The President of the United States is allowed, and fully approved by Congress, to stop all trade with a foreign country, which is far more onerous than a tariff, and license a foreign country, but is not allowed to put a simple tariff on a foreign country, even for purposes of national security? That is not what our great founders had in mind. The whole thing is ridiculous. Other countries can tariff us, but we can't tariff them." And so this is the sort of political dynamic at play here. Trump is making an appeal regarding these tariffs directly to the American people, at the same time that the U.S. Supreme Court is considering whether or not he had the authority to invoke them in the first place. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment, I'd like to quickly introduce today's sponsor, which is a phenomenal company called Patriot Mobile, possibly the best cell phone provider in America. You know, every choice we make is an opportunity to stand for freedom. Even seemingly simple choices like who we choose to be our cell phone provider. And here's the truth. Most cell phone providers, they don't really care about you. They want your money, and then they kick some of their profits to causes that you probably do not agree with. Patriot Mobile is different though. The past 12 years, they've stood with Americans who believe in faith, family, and freedom, and they've contributed millions of dollars to Christian conservative causes. And the best part is that with Patriot Mobile, you don't have to sacrifice quality for service. Patriot Mobile, they offer premium access to all 3 of the major U.S. networks, and so you will enjoy the same or even better coverage as most major carriers. Also, the actual process of making the switch is super simple. They have a 100% US-based team that can get you activated in minutes. Also, if you're stuck in a contract or you still owe money on your phone, no problem. They even have a contract buyout program. So there's literally nothing stopping you from making the switch. Just head on over to patriotmobile.com/Roman or call 972-PATRIOT. And best of all, use promo code ROMAN for a free month of service. So switch today, that's patriotmobile.com/Roman, or just call 972-PATRIOT. I'll also throw all their details down into the description box below. Now, assuming that the U.S. Supreme Court does not force the U.S. government to give all that money back, if we just do a little back of the envelope math, we will find that the amount of money collected thus far would allow roughly 100 million Americans to receive a $2,000 dividend check. Quote, based on the Treasury Department's recent statement on the federal government's receipts and outlays, the Trump administration collected $195 billion in customs and duties in the first 3 quarters of 2025. That would allow 97.5 million people to receive a $2,000 dividend check. There were roughly 267 million adults in the United States in 2024, according to estimates of the 2020 U.S. Census Bureau data. That year, YouGov profiled data indicated that roughly 18% of U.S. adults fell into the high-income bracket with income of more than $100,000 per year, which would exclude them from the suggested dividend, meaning that roughly 100 million tax-paying Americans would stand to get this money. Alternatively, though, Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, he said that this $2,000 dividend might come in a different form. Instead of a check being mailed to you, it might come as a tax cut. Speaking to ABC News, here's what he said. I haven't spoken to the president about this yet, but the $2,000 dividend could come in lots of forms, in lots of ways. It could be just the tax decreases that we are seeing in the president's agenda. You know, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. Those items are substantial deductions that are currently being financed in the tax bill. Very, very cool. You'll either get a $2,000 check, or the tax cuts that you already received will just be counted towards that $2,000 totals, not period. Also, if the government were to send out $2,000 checks directly to the people, just like they did during the pandemic, they would need the support of Congress. And to that end, a few months back, you had Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri introduce the American Worker Rebate Act, which would allow tariff revenue to be used for tax rebates of at least $600 per adult and child determined by income level. And since getting introduced in July, that bill has been read twice and referred to the Senate Committee on Finance. And so that is the current state of the $2,000 rebate checks. Basically, if you boil it down, everything hinges on this upcoming Supreme Court decision. If they decide to keep the tariffs in place, then either Congress will have to authorize these checks to go out directly to the people, or the Treasury Department can use some kind of a tax cut scheme to distribute the money that way. On the flip side, though, if the Supreme Court votes to go ahead and scrap the tariffs as they are currently formulated, well, the Secretary of the Treasury said that they have basically a contingency plan in place for that scenario. Quote, earlier in November, Bessent said that he expects the Supreme Court to uphold the IEEPA-based tariffs. If it strikes down the tariffs, the administration will switch to other tariff authorities, including Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, which allows broad 15% tariffs for 150 days to calm trade imbalances. Bessent said Trump can also invoke Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930, a statute that allows tariffs of up to 50% on countries that discriminate against U.S. commerce. And so there you have it, a solid chance of us getting $2,000 checks, but frankly, enough uncertainty in the water such that I wouldn't bet the house that the money will definitely be coming. If you'd like to read more about this issue, I will throw my research notes. You'll be able to find them down in the description box below this video, right below this like and subscribe buttons, both of which I hope you take a quick moment to smash. And lastly, I'll quickly mention that Epic Times is running a phenomenal promotional offer on subscriptions, such that, with or without this $2,000 check, everybody can afford it. And so basically, if you've been on the fence about trying the Times, looking for a source of unbiased, honest news, well, consider trying it out. With this trial subscription, you can get access to everything, all of our articles, our videos, our shows, documentaries, our analysis pieces, our infographics, everything moving forward, as well as going back 20 years. And the content out there is great. The Epic Times, in my opinion, is what a media outlet should do. We present to you the facts and let you make up your own mind. And we basically respect our readers enough to understand that they have their own intelligence, they have their own worldview. We're not trying to push a narrative on them. We're basically giving you the facts. We'll not only be supporting my work and the work at the Epic Times, but we'll be getting access to so much. So again, that link will be right there at the top of the description box below. Just click on that link.
Push that like button, double tap the screen.
Then you get unlimited access to everything. It costs barely pretty much 50 cents a week for the whole year, which works itself out to like $26 for the whole year. Super cheap. Give it a shot. You'll definitely love it. And the hope is that after that year, you'll be a subscriber for decades to come. So that's the hope. But there's no obligation. You can cancel anytime. So again, the link is right there at the top of the description below. Hope you check it out. And then, until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epic Times. Stay informed, and most important, stay free. A wild situation is unfolding over in Kansas, where you have a local mayor now facing several election-related felony charges because he voted for himself. The twist here, though, is that this particular mayor is not a U.S. citizen. He's actually a Mexican national living right here in the U.S. Let's go through the details together. Right after, I hope you take a super quick moment to smash those like and subscribe buttons so that this video can reach ever more people via the YouTube algorithm. Now, to begin with, over in Kansas, there is the small town of Coldwater. It's located in the southern part of the state, close to border with Oklahoma. And it's a fairly small, quiet American town. The median property value is $73,000. The median household income is roughly $46,000. The poverty rate is about half of the national average. And in terms of the demographics, at least according to the 2020 census, it was roughly 90% white, 6% Hispanic, around 1% black, and the rest was other. So that kind of gives you a picture of this small Kansas town. Now, since 2013, a man by the name of Jose Caballos, otherwise known as Joe Caballos, he's been serving in the local government there. Starting in 2013, he served 2 consecutive 4-year terms on the city council, after which he successfully ran for mayor in 2021. Then, just earlier this month, he won re-election. The next day, which was November 5th,